Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, the clean approach to building your successful business. Now, let's introduce Tom Borg and Dr. Dave Miles. Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, where we bring you the clean approach to building your successful business. And by clean, we are not talking about spick and span and dust mops. This podcast is all about the acronym CLEAN. We talk about communication, leadership, engagement.
And no drama.
And no drama, because there is more than enough of that around nowadays. We don't need any more additional of that. So today, we're going to continue our podcast from our last week's podcast. We talked about bridging the performance gap for your leadership team. And we talked specifically about one tool that we use with some of our clients. Doesn't have to be the tool that everybody uses, but just one thing that we use is called critical alignment, which is a behavioral based, assessment based, data driven approach to working with teams and really getting people to understand and really appreciate the diversity in their team, understand where they're lacking, and really be able to appreciate the differences of others, not just tolerate the differences of others. Really eye-opening, tons of ahas. But what we wanted to do, we realized after the fact that there were some specific pieces of this that we wanted to be able to get across so you could really get a better idea of how you could use some of these things for your team, and whether you're using a product or an assessment-based type format like we're using or anything else. Doesn't have to be with us, but I wanted to get the concepts across to you guys so you could really understand what you could do. So today's episode, we're going to talk about identifying the value of your team to the organization. So what is the value to the organization of not just, say, the team as a whole, but more specifically, this episode, we wanted to bring it down to the individual level and then the level of, say, the manager direct report, and how identifying the value to the organization is really can be a huge plus with all that. So Tom, get us started.
Sure. When we start to think about value, oftentimes, and we hear this many times with some of our clients, where they're thinking, well, I don't need to tell them how valuable they are to the organization. They get a paycheck. Don't need to tell them. Well, no, we do. And oftentimes we really don't even know all the value that a person brings to the table. So one of the assessments Dave and I use, we identify the value that person brings to the table, and we're able to open up a discussion between that individual and their person that they report to. So now what happens is we have a chance to elaborate on the value this person brings and how it can be better used within the organization. So we start to think about value. That's critical.
Yeah, and that, to me, I mean, I look at the answer, well, why is it important? I mean, if I'm looking at this pile of data and I'm looking at, okay, well, now I have in this report a list of, the value that this particular person brings to the organization, whether it's myself or whether it's, a direct report or a peer. I'm thinking, why is that important? Especially when it comes to your teams and your direct reports. We've said it over and over and over, and I wholeheartedly believe this, is that people don't leave organizations, people leave people. And so when you understand the value that someone brings to the organization, you can compliment them on that. You can help work with them on that. It helps your leadership ability, because if you're just the type of guy that, like you'd mentioned, well, we give them a paycheck. I don't know. I mean, what else do they want? John Maxwell talks about the 5 different levels of leadership, and you're really at the bottom of the barrel, level 1, just what I call a paycheck leader, called a positional leader. Like, if the only reason that they respect you or they listen to you as a leader or your authority is because you're standing in between them and a paycheck, that's pretty weak. So the next time somebody offers them a bigger paycheck, they're gone. And there's your turnover, there's your engagement. And then even if they're not gone, just look at the engagement. I mean, what are you losing in productivity because, of that type of engagement? So that's really, I think, the starting point of why that's important. There's a couple other reasons, but I think that one is the biggest one to start out with.
Absolutely. Well, we start to look at the long term or the big picture for that individual potential development, and that starts sitting down the beginning of the year or the end of the year, looking forward to the next one, and planning out what this person needs to do to improve, what are the skill sets they want to acquire that are going to help them become more valuable to the organization. Now, if we can capitalize on the value they already have,
Yeah.
that they bring to the organization and build on that. Now we've got a winning combination. You don't want to make someone more valuable in an area that they're very weak and they're really not going to get much better at that. So that would be better off having someone else take on that particular responsibility or responsibilities. But we want to look at this as part of the overall or holistic picture in development of that individual. So if we can use this as part of their performance appraisal program, that ongoing program, the way Dave and I like to refer to it, as something that's communicated about throughout the year, so that person has an understanding of how they're doing, where they need to get better, or at the same time what they've accomplished. This helps them stay on track so that they're able to truly reach the goals that have been set for them for the next 12 months. So part of this value identification process is going to be part of that, because now we know what they're good at, what they need to get better at, but at the same time, we're appreciating them. Just as you said, Dave, if we don't show appreciation to people, we're missing a valuable part of motivating that person to want to be part of your team. So that's important that we bring that up.
And I think on a one-on-one level, that's extraordinarily important. And if you're looking at it from the team level, everybody's got their individual component piece that they're working on for the team. What I really like about the idea of people really understanding where they're coming from, understanding behavioral and communication styles, things that drive them, things that they're competent and really good at. To me, that says a lot, because now I understand when you say something, I'm not reading into it or ascribing it some kind of context that it doesn't have. I kind of know how you're, for lack of a better term, hardwired, how you do what you do. And so now I can use that as a filter and realize, oh, okay, if I'm looking at it from that other person's perspective, kind of the way they look at and view the world, I'm not going to get upset, because I understand that they weren't saying something malicious. They weren't coming across in a bad way. They weren't trying to be hurtful. It's just they're more blunt, and I'm more of a, hey, how's the wife and kids? How's the soccer game? I'm more the, let's get the conversation going first, and then we'll get into business. But some people just dive straight into business, vomit the 3 bullet points, and out the door they go. And you realize that, when you can eliminate a lot of those misunderstandings, it just gets rid of a lot of bad feelings, a lot of tension, a lot of stress that's in the workplace. And honestly, it just makes for a much better working environment overall.
You bet. Yeah, we need to understand the team that we have that works with us or for us. And if we can do that, we're going to be in a better place to just first meet their psychological needs as well as their work needs, so that we can help them maximize their talents on the job. So it's all part of that process of opening up communication. And that's what I love about using an assessment. You can gauge that, you can measure that, and you can actually open up a dialogue on it, so that you can shed light on where that person is doing well and where you need to do better as a leader to connect with that person and help them maximize their abilities.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I do like is when you have a data-driven approach, it takes a little bit of the subjectivity out of it.
Yes.
When you have a valid, reliable instrument that has a lot of science behind it, even if it's a self-reporting instrument, it's one of those things that it's not just a, here's my opinion. The questions are asked in a certain way, and they're asked over and over and over again for that internal reliability. So that way that's in validity. So that way they know that, all right, well, I've got something here I can bank on. And when I'm sharing this information with you, it's not just, I think I'm good at this. It says, hey, this is, or I think this is where there might be a strength. But what I like is when you take and combine little different pieces of it, you're looking at a specific portion of, let's just say, a behavioral assessment that talks about, hey, what value, based on how you do what you do, what value you bring to the organization.
Absolutely. And Dave, an example,
government.
An example of that?
Yeah.
What would be an example of some of the value that someone brings to the organization that one of our assessments would identify?
Well, one of the things that, whether it's a time management or whatever, and I know I'm going to let you go through the list that you have there, but one of the things I like to do is take that value to the organization list that you talk about and directly compare them to their competencies. Part of the report is a set of 25 soft skill competencies or people skills that are ranked in developmental orders. There's strength-based type of ranking. So that way, here's what I'm really well developed in, here's what I'm developed in, here's what I'm okay at, and here's the stuff I'm just not the greatest at. And you mentioned it before, and that's why I wanted to bring it up for the listeners to really hit this one home. If you can tie in the value you bring to the organization with the things that you're good at, those are the things you want to double down on. Like I said, you want to spend a lot of time, effort, and energy if you create a development plan for somebody, for a subordinate. Do you really want to spend a lot of time working on something that's they're going to make small little increments on, and may it not be that much if it's crucial to the job and it's definitely a weakness and they have to kind of improve on it somewhere, maybe. But if it's, why spend a lot of time on something that's not really their strength when you can take and double down on the stuff they're really good at, or put them in the position where they can capitalize on the things that they are a value to the organization and the skills that they're the best at and what drives them.
Absolutely. So we'll take for an example with one of these sample reports I have right here in front of me. It lists out several bullet points or descriptors of the value that person brings to the organization. So some of them in this particular case with this particular person's assessment style, which is he's a high I and a high D. So they're high influencer, high dominant. Some of them are that the people oriented. Okay, great. Another one would be verbalizes his feelings, self-reliant. So just stop right there with those three things. You could sit and have a conversation about each one of those bullet points with that individual and just asking them, how do they feel? Is that accurate? Does that seem to reflect the value they feel they bring to the table? And if so, how can that be leveraged within the organization? How can they find opportunity to utilize that characteristic on projects or in certain jobs that they're working on? How can that person be called in to be part of a team, possibly, because they have that strength and they could be able to apply that in a group setting where they're working on a project together? So this is where you can go with these values when you are able to identify the value that person brings to your organization. Now we're able to really maximize some things that are going to help that person be a better achiever, and at the same time give them some appreciation from the people they work with as well as the people they work for.
Absolutely. And one thing I wanted to go back just to clarify, you talked about the sample that you had from one of your clients who said the person was a high D or a high I. Well, just for explanation purposes, what Tom is talking about is kind of on the behavioral end of it, on the, say, the DISC end of it, or the D for dominance. What they're talking about is how they deal with problems and challenges. And so people can be either direct on one side of the spectrum or reflective on the other. So this person would be much more direct than reflective. And then for the high, that's how they deal with people in contacts. And so that's how they influence people. How do you deal with other people? How do you deal with contacts? And so that kind of goes from outgoing on one end of the spectrum to reserved on the other end of it. So the person that Tom is talking about would be considered very direct on how they deal with problems and challenges, and very outgoing on how they deal with people in contacts. And so that gives you a little bit of context on the value that person would be bringing to the organization. So what are some of the other things on that list that to just add some examples?
Sure. Well, in this case, again, the person being a high D, high I, pioneering. That's another characteristic. They're a team player. Another is that they're bottom line oriented. So just those three things right there. Look, go back in reverse. Bottom line oriented. You want this person to be on this project because guess what? They're going to make sure that they get the maximum amount of results for the time and money that's been invested in that project. So that would be a good person to have on that team. In addition to that, when you think about pioneering, so okay, is this person willing to take some risks? Right? Doesn't want to play it safe, but wants to take some calculated risks that could be very helpful to the success of that project. The team player. You don't want someone necessarily that's going to be domineering for the whole discussion or in that group participation, but someone that was willing to let other people speak up, be part of the solution. So those are just three areas that we could start to leverage in terms of helping that person maximize their potential and putting them in the right place to implement it, to utilize it.
And I think that's exactly right. One of the things that I always like to look at is when you're talking about this from an individual basis, it's really good to find out what strengths that you have and what value that you bring to the organization. But on the other hand, when you start looking at we talked about earlier in the podcast about that manager direct report relationship. Well, a lot of times, if I'm the employee, okay, I'm trying to get a promotion, I'm trying to move up in the organization, I'm constantly trying to sell you, assessment or no assessment, what I'm doing for you, the value that I'm bringing to the organization. Here's what I'm doing. Here's my numbers. Here's my stats. Here's, what I've been able to accomplish, different projects. Well, that's really good. But one more layer to add on to it. Do you know what value your boss brings to the organization?
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you're kind of hybrid or working remote and you don't get to see him or her all the time. A lot of times, since you're so distant, and in general management theory, I mean, complaints pretty much should go up and not down, just general things that you would think about. You might not always understand exactly what value your immediate superior, your boss, brings to the organization. And so sitting down and being able to compare and contrast, not just that, there's a lot of other things that you should compare and contrast sitting down on a one-on-one with some kind of report like this. But when you can look at, here's the value that I'm bringing to the organization, but also here's the value you're bringing to the organization, how those two mesh and how they work together, and how some things might conflict and some things work together really well. But at least it's all out on the table. You can't fix it even if there is an area of conflict, you can't fix it if you don't know about it.
For example, I've got one client that I've worked with in the past, very domineering, very pioneering, very future-oriented, and willing to take risks, where his team, which is a number of, they're actually directors of different clinics, they don't necessarily originally understand nor respect that those skill sets were very important to the success of that overall company. So once they got an understanding of that this gentleman in particular was exhibiting these qualities, and they really were an important part of the formula for success, they then had a better appreciation and more tolerance for his style of leading. So that was an important thing.
Yeah, and that's really my point on what I was talking about with that. Because I mean, if you're like, well, they're always talking about new locations, they're always talking about the profit, they're always talking about the bottom line, they're talking this, and what about this, and what about that? And at some point, like you mentioned about the clinics, it's about, what's the great environment we can produce for them? What can we do for the patients and the quality of the patient care, and all the things are extraordinarily important. But that's their focus on their level at their particular clinic. Where you're looking at, okay, if we don't sustain the organization, if we don't continue to grow, if we don't continue to be profitable, then we're not going to have an organization.
That's right.
And to have the people in the, like Jim Collins says in Good to Great, the right seats, and the right people in the right seats on the bus. But it's very easy to misunderstand that. And that is one of the things, chalk it up under communication, however you want to look at it, or leadership. But I think it makes a big difference when you can really understand, that's why the VP does it. That's why the director does it. That's why the CEO does that. That's why they're like they are. That's why the regional manager does X, Y, Z. It's because this is the value they're bringing to the organization. This is what they're trying to accomplish. This is what they're doing. Just like what you said with the one client you had with the clinics. They're like, that makes sense. I understand it. And I think once you get to that level of understanding, that's really where that breaks down a lot of barriers and you can start working much better together.
That's right. All right. Well, I guess to sum things up, what would you want to say here at this point, Dave?
Well, I would think that to wrap this up is, for an individual, it's always a good thing. Go out, do different assessments, do different things, find out, it's very important to be self-aware on, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, behavioral and communication styles, skills and competencies that you have, things that drive you and really motivate you. A high level of self-awareness is super important, whether that's in a lot of different areas. We've been talking a lot about emotional intelligence, and that's particularly one of them. But if you can take not just that self-awareness, but now you can start as a team leader, as a VP, as a director, and start to look at that across your supervisors and managers and across your team, and really be able to get an idea of the players on your team as a team, and then when you can take some of that data and break it down and look at individuals. Okay, what value do they bring to the organization versus the skill competencies that they have?
Mm-hmm.
And then really take and kind of, like you said, on that one-on-one, and really be able to kind of compare and contrast the differences between, if you have the manager and his or her 6 or 7 direct reports, that they can sit down and go through all those. And now you understand, hey, I might need to change the way I communicate the same message 2 or 3 different ways because I have lots of different styles of people, lots of different varieties of people that are on my team.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that you can customize that and tweak it just a little bit to them, and you're thinking about them, like we were talking about the platinum rule, being able to meet them at where they're at, doing to them what they would like to be done, not just what you would rather do.
Mm-hmm.
That really kind of meets them in the middle, honestly. And I think that kind of level of understanding really helps drive engagement. And I think that just makes for a more productive organization, overall happier workers. And I think just goodness all the way around. So I don't think you can go wrong. So start with the self-awareness, learn about your team, figure out how you can put that into place. Everybody, all ties back to organizational culture. They're all using the similar language with everybody and everything. So I think all that really, really ties into your leadership style, the way you communicate, and ultimately, I think the employee engagement and organizational culture.
Well said.
So that'll be all that we have for this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want a sample of the assessment that we are talking about to see whether that would be something that would be interesting for your team, contact either Tom or myself. Our information is below. We'd be more than happy to get you a complimentary sample of that just so you could review it, see what you think, and see if this was something that might be good for your team. But we appreciate you all listening to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, where we bring you the clean approach to building your successful business. And we will see you on the next episode. Take care.